Welcome to the Pelle, Neroth, Taylor and Martin Sieff show, Capitals Uncovered. We've got Hall Gardner with us today, who's a poet. He's written lots of geopolitics books. And both of you gentlemen were around and active adults for the time of the topic that we're due to discuss today, at least to start with. I think, Hall, you were reading poems and you were very against it. And Martin, I think you were covering it from a very advanced, prominent position. What I'm talking about, of course, is the 40th. It's 40 years ago since Chernobyl happened, the worst nuclear disaster in history, and it's had a sort of second coming in terms of publicity with a Netflix series. Was it a couple of years ago, which a lot of people think was best thriller type, type series with all this noirish elements and a picture of a collapsing Soviet Union that's ever been made. Actually, an acquaintance of mine, a Swede. But my view is that it's the damages were highly exaggerated. And I think I'm going to get pushback from you here, but I think that it's probably one of the world's worst disasters, not in terms of the actual disaster, but what it meant for nuclear power. Because with nuclear power, and if we continue to develop nuclear power, in terms of what might be expected to do, we could have used thorium, for instance, which is an alternative to uranium. We could have had, so if we spent all our bucks on that rather than other things, we could have had a carbon-free, relatively clean baseload energy. I mean, it's not dependent on the vagaries of wind and solar as the others are, and almost infinite forever because there's so much thorium in the sea, and we'd have learned methods to extract that. And we could have had this for centuries, thousands of years to come, and we wouldn't have the Iran war, we wouldn't have the Ukraine war, and all the rest of it. But my case is that Chernobyl and then Fukushima in 2011 put the kibosh on this, mostly out of sentimental reasons. Because it's just like COVID, the feeling people out there triumphed over the facts and logic people. And I just want to say a thing about, I was working for a top engineering magazine in the UK, and they knew all these things. And I said, well, why don't you shout it from the rooftops? I said, well, we don't have the lobbying power in Whitehall. And it shows you that the people who knew, because Whitehall, as the British establishment, was run by people who'd been to Oxford and studied PPE, and they didn't know a damn thing about scientific methods. So I'm going to get quite emotional about it. The people who don't know don't have the voice, and the people who don't know, the bullshitters out there, they are run by sentiment and feeling. And we saw that exactly in the COVID crisis, but we saw it more importantly over Chernobyl. Now, what I'm going to present to you, gentlemen, if you ask the average person, they might say, well, thousands of people died at Chernobyl. Well, it's actually 15 people died as a direct result of the cancer, the cleanup. And 28 kids sadly died of the thyroid that followed from that. There is no cancer, very little or very low cancer signal in two prominent Ukrainian studies that have been carried out since then. One's called Trends in Solid Tumor Incidence in Ukraine 30 Years After Chernobyl by Crystal Leung and Galina Shabat. And the other one, well, I'll put it in my Substack. I'm going to link to my Substack down below because I've got all the facts there. And I wrote a piece on it. And then the second one is the Ukrainian-American study of leukemia and related disorders among Chernobyl cleanup workers. Well, there's no signal for radiation cancers. And the signals that you see for the other cancers could well have been due to confounding factors. That is, they drink and smoke more than the average person. And there's the screening issue. These people are intensively monitored and screened. So a lot of people who have those cancers out there among the normal public weren't detected. So there's a slight signal, but not in the signal in the radiation caused cancer. So it could be a lifestyle issue. Fukushima, which happened in 2011, which led to the Energiewende in Germany, which meant so they now pinch everyone else's energy, including Sweden's and dirty energies from the rest of Europe, and which has led to the energy crisis we're in Europe with the Russians due to cut off oil supplies and the Europeans sanctioning themselves against Russian energy and reliant on the very, very expensive American gas. None of this was necessary if we'd stuck to nuclear and developed nuclear. Well, the Energiewende was based on Fukushima. Well, nobody died. There's no large radiation exposure to humans in Fukushima. One person got some economic compensation for cancer, and about 5 workers, I think, got some cancer-related compensation. So, I mean, that was people say, well, Chernobyl, let's say there's another survey. There's a committee of the UN that got together in 2005 said that the total cancer cases in Europe in the lifetime of those who live in 1986 might be up to 5 or 10,000 deaths. Well, that's an invisible signal among the 50 million people who die of cancer in the European region anyway in the course of their lifetime. So it's like 1 in 10,000 of cancers will be a Chernobyl related cancer. Now, that's the official consensus. It's an invisible signal. Okay, well, that's Chernobyl. That's bad enough. But I mean, Fukushima is several scales of magnitude lesser, and it's in a modern advanced economy, Japan. And those are the kind of nuclear plants that we'd have. The nuclear plants that we'd have in Europe and in North America wouldn't be on a tsunami earthquake subduction zone. They'd be in safe old Europe, so we wouldn't even have those problems anyway. And if we had them, it wouldn't need too much because we'd be even safer than those very safe Fukushima machines. What are the costs? Well, we lack cheap energy, and we're reliant on fossil fuels that kill millions of people, up to 5 million people, according to the WHO, every year. According to and how many so if you the point is that the nuclear opponents say, well, if we abolish nuclear, then it's all going to be good, we're going to save thousands of lives, but you're not saving thousands of lives unless you abolish. It's a too bad alternative, not an alternative between the perfect and the bad, because thousands of people die in coal mining accidents, millions of people die of respiratory diseases due to coal, even people fall off windmills. So I mean, even that's dangerous. And there's been a study, which I'll cite it in my Substack, that shows deaths per terawatt hour of electricity produced. And the figures come from Markandia and Wilson in the Lancet from 2007, and Sovacool et al. 2016. And I'll let you talk in a second, guys. Brown coal, 32 deaths per terawatt hour. Coal, 24 deaths per terawatt hour. Oil, 18 deaths per terawatt hour. Natural gas, 2.8 deaths per terawatt hour. Hydropower, 1.3 deaths per terawatt hour. Wind, 0.04 deaths per terawatt hour. Nuclear, 0.03 deaths per terawatt hour. Chernobyl and Fukushima included. Solar, 0.02 deaths per terawatt hour. So it's nuclear safer than everything except solar, and even more safe than wind, and much, much more safe than the other things that still power our economies. So my contention is that we've gone crazy over nuclear. A lot of activists out there, a lot of activists who changed their name, changed their views. The founder of Greenpeace, Patrick Moore, changed his mind. James Lovelock is a bit more far out, but a lot of people who were part of the agreement and were strong activists said, well, we were actually wrong, and because we're logical people, we change our minds when the facts change. But a lot of people, the average person who watches 2 minutes a day of the news and relies on the lies and the deceptions of the mainstream media, they probably still think Chernobyl and nuclear are bad, and they don't want to have it. And as a result, we have distinctly suboptimal energy outcomes. Gentlemen, what do you think? Martin?
Well, first, since Hall is our guest, I'd like to if you all don't object, Hall, to be center stage on this. But on this one, Pelle, at long last, we have an area of genuine disagreement. I disagree with you on virtually all points. Chernobyl was such a catastrophe that it was central to bringing down the Soviet Union. The figures you're talking about are largely fudged figures. One has to look at the specific rates of cancer in Ukraine and in Belarus, especially Belarus was hit much more seriously by the disaster because of the prevailing wind patterns in Ukraine wars. In Fukushima, the Japanese people, already understandably traumatized by having 2 atomic bombs dropped on them, with all the radiation effects from that in 1945, took Fukushima and still take it extremely seriously. You can go and visit the Chernobyl region and enjoy the certainly more abundant, though mutating wildlife there. I would not do so. I would not do so. The fear of nuclear is a very real one. Plutonium is such a phenomenally dangerous substance that it does not exist in nature. It is a byproduct of the nuclear industries that we have developed during and since World War II. Plutonium only was known to exist theoretically before if that, but before World War II. When you're dealing with nuclear, the technology is unforgiving. Thorium is science fiction. We don't know what we'd be getting into with thorium. It's definitely worth exploring and looking at, because the safer you can find with these things, the better it is. I am hugely skeptical about the so-called super safe pebble reactors that the Chinese boast of and are developing. Uh, because the same basic the problem is not that theoretical science. In both cases, the problem is human error and unpredictability in both cases. Fukushima was supposed to be earthquake proof, but it turned out not to be tsunami proof. Nobody believed a tsunami catastrophe of that scale could happen except once in a million years or 2 million years or 30,000 years. Well, guess what? In a matter of decades, it did happen. And if it happened there, it can happen again and again and again and again. Our globe is not as remotely as stable as it is made out to be. There is a future ahead, and it should be a future based on oil and especially on natural gas. And in the long run, solar power and fusion power and what people speculate about 0 point energy and what have you. These things are theoretically conceivable. A lot of work is being done on them. They may be decades in the future. They may be a century or two in the future, but we certainly have enough oil and natural gas to get through till then. If winds could function and fill a gap in solar, I'd be all for them. But there I disagree with Hall, I'm sure. Germany and Britain have been going that route. And what's the result? They've deindustrialized. Their standards of living of their people are collapsing. Their social contract is collapsing. You cannot sustain a world of 7 billion people without key energy sources. And people say nuclear is one of them. But the technology and the biology involved here are so dangerous and so unforgiving that it's suicide to do it,
I mean,
especially when
but
we're looking at a world
but
with.
you haven't disputed any of the science papers I've quoted. Do you think they're all nonsense? I mean, when they say that no one died at Fukushima from the
Oh, that's
radiation.
absurd. That's absurd.
Okay, well, quote, where are your facts?
Actually, I hadn't expected to come up with them, so I'll probably have to come up with them
Okay.
later in
Well,
the
I
show
mean,
or in a different show. But
okay.
the Japanese government took it seriously enough. When it comes to
But all you do, you're just
Chernobyl, the
quoting
opposite was the
feelings. You're
case.
exactly the problem that I was illustrating in the beginning of my show, which is, which is,
Ha, I don't see you quote. No, you say you quote papers, but what I want to know is what are the actual figures per capita of population, but after these disasters in those areas, as opposed to before those disasters. Those are the key figures to look for.
right. Well, there
What
was
are
no,
they?
yeah, well, sorry. Well, I've got a paper here, which I'll put in my Substack. We could discuss. I mean, the problem with science papers is that they are hard to talk through on a podcast.
Precisely.
No, well, I'm going to tell you this paper I'm quoting saying there's no radiation signal. The cancers are elevated, but it could be because but there's no specific elevation of cancer in the areas of Ukraine that which were affected by radiation. So there's no radiation signal. And I mean, well, but for our next time, I checked out two papers, both by Ukrainians, and um, it says, for instance, but I mean, we can grant the issue that Chernobyl has raid. Let's grant all the anti-Chernobyl people their argument. But I mean, there's several levels, several barriers in this argument as well. Even if you're right on the Chernobyl case, doesn't mean you're right on the Fukushima case. But even, I mean, as I said, the UN said there's 5,000 extra deaths. That seems to be the confirmation all over Europe. There's a commission that got together in 2005 to discuss this. As said, it's all on my Substack because I took out these quotes and the papers people can read for themselves or run it through AI. And it's and especially when you compare it to the damages from other things, the security cost of sourcing our oil and gas from the Middle East or Russia, if you're a Russia opponent, the problem of running out. Oil we need for plastics anyway, not for running our
But
energy or our heating.
we're going to be running out of uranium too. We're going to be running
Well,
out of
no,
uranium
well,
much
not if you
faster than
use
we're
fast
running out of
breeder
coal.
reactors.
Uranium does not exist in significant quantities around the world, whereas coal does, because there are reasons for this in the periodic table. There are reasons for this in geology. Uranium is a much infinitely rarer substance to find than coal. The Chinese, of course, who are desperate for any understandable source of energy, are actually, they invest more in nuclear power than anyone else, true, but they also invest more than everybody else in the world combined in new technologies to clean coal. India continues to rely primarily on coal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, as said, if we put all our energy, I'm not an expert on the supply of uranium. You could be right there. But I think that and I'll have the answer for our next show. But my argument would be that if we'd spent all our energy instead of stopping development and advancing development on thorium and uranium, maybe we would have got somewhere. And I think there might be more uranium than you think, but I'll check it out. But Hall, sorry, this is not
The
just
same
the two of
argument can be
us.
applied to solar, though. I remember when Jimmy Carter marched down in his inauguration with solar energy panels and trying to sell that. And then Ronald Reagan came around and said, no, we're going to have gas guzzling cars. And one of the main reasons Carter lost the election against Reagan was because Reagan was going to let people ride in big cars and use as much gas as they wanted to. Well, Carter was trying to push us in the solar alternative energy route. And see that there's a whole philosophy different. When you have solar panels, they're decentralized. When it's nuclear, it's highly centralized. And if one plant blows up for whatever reason, you've cut out thousands and thousands of maybe hundreds of thousands of people from the electrical source. Well, a decentralized approach, solar energy and other sources, becomes a whole different society. So that's why when I was a young man many years ago, I was very adamant for an alternative approach to energy because I saw it as a whole social. Now the I mean, I also know my friend who worked in a plutonium plant became sterile. He even said that he was more protected than the workers. So there is problems there. How well they're protected or not, I don't know. But the distribution of radioactive materials, the half-lives of these things are thousands of years, and they eventually get into our organisms through osmosis. It climbs up the ladder. So,
Mm.
I mean, I don't know all the statistics for the amount of cancer rates and deaths directly from radiation, but my first critique was social. You have a nuclear elite, a technical elite who's in charge of these things. The nuclear energy is an offshoot of the military-industrial complex. It helped amortize the nuclear weapons program. It was a way the Atoms for Peace program was a way to pay for nuclear weapons. So it was really related there. And it also, in France in particular, but also in the US, it has prevented the alternative energies from coming into place because the money is in the nuclear and it's in the coal industry, and the gas industry. And if you look at the subsidies over the years for those, government gave more money to subsidies, at least the gas petroleum and gas, and nuclear is down ways of it. Solar is way lower. So my point from a social basis,
They're
I
good
really
questions. I mean, they're good responses, I think, Yeah, sure. I mean, isn't that I mean, because French writers have written a lot about this. I mean, was it Bruno Latour or something? I can't remember. These
yeah,
sociologists of science. I
yeah.
remember there was a while when I was reading up on nuclear when I was working for this engineering magazine, and the French, being heavily reliant on nuclear, have advanced these thoughts. Although you could say, I mean, if it's down to solar, people are not that responsible for themselves. They need a centralized provision of, I mean,
Well, that's scary. But no, I think community-wise, it's a much more. Well, I mean, I know one ecologist who did a study of Washington, D.C., and he said the nuclear option was ridiculous. So where was the most energy being used? It was in the summer for air conditioning. So the problem was to find the right electrical capabilities to fill the needs for the summer because of air conditioning, but the rest of the year, any power plant could have handled the amount of energy. So looking specifically at the region, you see, is what I'm trying to say here, to see what the actual regions are need, rather than kind of having a blanket centralized approach, is what nuclear power gives you. And also
Wait a
would
minute, can
say
you explain
that
your,
the threat of war and terrorism. Look at Zaporizhzhia and these other things that are under attack now. I mean, this is a target for both terrorism and
Yes.
military capabilities to have these highly centralized power plants that once you wipe them out, you might spread wet radiation or whatever, but you're also going to wipe out the power sources for thousands and thousands of people. So to me, again, a decentralized approach to energy makes much more sense.
Well, I mean, there are good arguments, although as I said, I'm a bit skeptical about this utopianism because people won't be able to look after energy sources. But sure, but what you're saying about the air conditioning, what is it about that? I mean, I didn't follow this train of argument there.
In Washington, D.C., air conditioning goes up like crazy
Right.
in
Yeah.
August. The amount of electricity just skyrockets.
Right. And you need
so
a supply for that.
You need a supply for that, so you don't need it for the whole year. And so
Okay.
finding
So
decentralized
that can be
ways to
supplied by
provide for that
solar
and
and the rest.
reducing
No, well, it can't
the
be actually.
power.
No.
Sorry.
Solar works in a little bit in places like Arizona and Australia, but the economics of solar are terrible. If you look at California and even Australia, the Doomberg website, which you actually have to splash out a few $100 to get decent full coverage from it because it's very serious and is taken seriously by energy professionals in the industry, does the best accessible reporting on this of anyone else. And in Australia and California, which have both societies filled with sunshine and warm summers and global warming and warmer weather, which ought to be ideal for solar heating, basically, serious industry is breaking down. Costs of electricity are skyrocketing. Social unrest is breaking down completely. And they have relied enormously on solar, and also on hydro in California as well. In Northern California and in the Northwest United States, you have ideal environments for hydro. And hydro actually works relatively well in British Columbia, in Oregon, in Washington State, but that's because they have small populations, vast areas, and climates with a great deal of rain. If you're looking at energy dense technologies that can produce the reliable energy you need to sustain mass societies in a world of 7 or 8 billion people, you only have coal, oil, natural gas, and nuclear with all its problems. The rest is wishful thinking. And nuclear comes with another huge issue that you haven't mentioned, Pelle. And it's very ironic because it's something you and I share our great fears about. What did we found this podcast on? What have you discussed? Does Hall agree with us on completely? The three of us are obsessed, and rightly so, with the fear of nuclear war breaking out, given especially the irresponsible policies we find in Britain and America in particular, and the potentially dangerous policies of Russia and China, who are not kumbaya, peace-loving pacifists at all. I see the agreement in your face, of course, as you know, Hall, and I know you know too, Pelle. It's enormously dangerous to assume that the people running policy in Moscow and Beijing, if pushed to the limit, will not press nuclear buttons. But once nuclear weapons are fired, what happens when they hit nuclear installations? The Ukrainians, who are now dominated by this very sinister and fanatical, violent clique, the Zelensky regime, have targeted Russian nuclear facilities. What will happen if they hit them? What will happen if the Russians retaliate in kind against nuclear facilities in Germany or France, or for that matter, in the United States? Even if Fukushima was harmless, even if Chernobyl was harmless, and it certainly wasn't taken as harmless at the time. And I see no. By the way, a key point there that I actually looked up while this conversation was starting was that the paucity of studies on this. Uh, Belarus doesn't do studies on this to any significant degree. Ukraine has been in a state of chaos and collapse since 2014, and its government did not have a strong central executive before that either. The documentation on this is very weak. The reassuring documentation on this is very weak. We find again and again in history, and I'm talking to two serious established historians here, but both of you have done such important work on. You both know that on issues like the start of World War II, the start of World War One, material is being reassessed and discovered even now. We
Yeah,
don't
they're all good points. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But
But
the point is, they're all good points in an area where caution is essential. Nobody expected in 1945 the death toll from both the nuclear attacks to be as high as they were. People were dying of cancers from that in a massive scale a decade afterwards. The United States carried out dozens of atmospheric tests over Nevada and within the United States in the decade after World War II. Millions of people ultimately died from premature cancers then, and cancer rates soared within the United States to degrees previously not known. Now, of course, people were also there's the classic case of John Wayne and so many Hollywood movie stars who died from lung cancer.
Howard Hughes.
They smoked heavily. But also, of course, they've been many of the people who'd been making movies in Nevada and near the Mojave Desert when the atomic bombs were going off in other parts of the continent. The wind patterns were blowing in that direction. Lo and behold, you find a very large number of them died long before their time too. So this is an area that's enormously dangerous and that we don't know, at the very least, we don't know enough about.
Okay. I mean, I'm with you on everything up to the last point. I mean, I'd have to check the science on that. I mean, is it there could be confounding factors. And the reason why cancers are rising is that people live longer anyway, so they're more likely to get the kind of diseases of old age, and also because they have much worse lifestyles than they ever used to have, because of
no, I think the opposite is the case.
prosperity.
More people live into their 90s and into their hundreds, and I know a surprising number of them myself.
No,
Precisely
that's what I'm saying.
Healthcare in the developed world is so much
when
better.
when we get older, I think. But I mean, I'm not. I'm not. Okay,
Well, I
I'll
just
have to
wanted to
check
add
that
that
out. The idea of
Paul,
my youthful idealism has faded out somewhat, but
mine
I still
too.
think that you need a variety of energy resources. You can never be too dependent on any one of them, and you
Yes.
have to pick those that are somewhat less dangerous to the environment and to ourselves. And I just don't see nuclear as the only as the best option. I think there are other options that could be
Look,
developed
Okay, well, I tell you what,
if I may briefly here, not only have I written this, I've written a book on this.
Yeah,
I wrote a book in 2012 called That Should Still Be Us, advocating reindustrialization policies for both Europe and North America, the United States and Canada. And one of the key points I went in there, and an expert, I think familiar to all of us, who I'd love to have on our show if he'd come, and that is Dr. Robert Bryce. And Dr. Robert Bryce is very much a skeptic on some key areas. But if you look at the work he's done, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but in my book, I have the calculations that at current rate of use, we are going to run out of uranium at least 100 years before we run out of coal. And we're much more likely to find much more massive amounts of coal around the world because geologically, that's just there in the Permian levels, in the catastrophe levels, deep down from millions of years ago. The Chinese and the Indians have more coal than they can sit on. The British are simply not using their coal anymore. Developing technologies to use clean coal, which the Chinese take extremely seriously, is vastly preferable. Green policies have already done to Germany what two world wars, the Great Depression, the splitting of the country in half through the Cold War, all failed to do.
Yeah, exactly.
The US and Britain dropped 2.5 million tons of bombs on Germany through most of World War II, and they failed to deindustrialize the Ruhr. But we have now, Germany today themselves, the German people have deindustrialized the Ruhr through their
All
green
right.
policies,
I'm just
and their
going to,
standard
sorry,
of living is
we've
collapsing
got a
as a
few minutes
result.
left. I'm just going to summarize. I mean, basically, I think that I won the argument on casualties directly, because or at least the papers, there's a good case to be made. But you both of you raised very, very significant points about the amount of uranium that's left in the soil, the security issues about nuclear power, nuclear bombing, nuclear plants. Um, and as you said, the centralization issue is a very important one. And the expense, I guess, and all, and it's going to be, and what you're saying is that the cancer resulting from nuclear explosions, and that could be the case. I mean, we've all got strontium in our bodies. Everyone born since
Yeah.
1945, you know.
We have
Um,
Teflon too.
Teflon, yeah. But I mean, exactly. But I would also say, sorry, is that we've got oil and gas kills millions of people through respiratory disease. We mustn't
No,
forget
it
that,
doesn't.
and
I'm not
plastic. Okay, well, I'm just citing here a couple of science papers, but maybe you have other science papers saying
got
different.
plastic
Yes,
in
of
my
course there are
guts
other
too.
science papers.
Okay,
Absolutely.
all right. Okay, well, that's a contested thing. We'll leave it till
It's
till the
very
next. But I
contested.
mean, it's the. I mean, I guess, but it's one lobby group against the other, isn't it? Really?
Yes. And therefore, you can't believe
But
blindly the nuclear
no,
lobby
no.
group when the dangers of nuclear radiation
Okay, but I
and
mean,
the
even
dangers of
even
fallout are
assuming
so
that nuclear,
great.
sorry, even assuming that uh, deaths from oil and gas and through respiratory diseases is 1,000 times less than the advocates and the papers that I read. I mean, at least as peer-reviewed journals, it's still higher than the deaths from Chernobyl and Fukushima. Anyway, we've got a few
No, they
minutes
are
left.
not.
People die from respiratory disease. You just have to look at the smog in a city like Delhi.
They were doing that before modern technology ever came along. It is modern technology that clears that, but there is advanced technology and there is dangerous technology. Nuclear, the waste from nuclear has to be put in concrete containment containers that crack from the radiation after a few
Yeah.
years and decades when they were supposed to last for tens of thousands of years. This is a huge problem to this day in the American
There's leaks at
nuclear
every major
military
power plant
industry.
in the US.
Sorry,
And
Hall?
for leaks at every major power plant in the United States. So,
Exactly, exactly.
Well, anyway, you could say that the amount of I'm quoting from the top of my head now. You could fit into one very large garage or something, you know, in this far smaller
No, no, you
space
can't.
than you
yeah.
think.
No, entire states in the United States, very many of them flatly refuse to have any containment
Yeah. Well,
facilities
I've
anywhere in
okay. I
their
mean,
states
it's now
for
it's prejudice
any
talking to
waste
prejudice,
nuclear
but I
fuel.
I've heard that you surprisingly little protected space that you need to put away or to sort of bury this high grade. I mean, it's not like vast acres; it's really small.
No,
Hall.
that's only if the concrete holds, and the concrete cannot hold and does not hold because radiation is continually degrading the concrete, which nobody
Well, if you put it at
dreamed
the
would
bottom of a
happen
mountain, a huge
when the
mountain, or
stuff was
yeah.
first stuffed down there in the
Most
1950s and
most of the
60s.
power plants are already way over the years that they were supposed to be
Precisely.
rebuilt. And I mean, in France here, they're almost all 20 or 30 years too old. And I'm sure it's the
Yeah, and the
same.
French have the longest lifespans in Europe, and the hell, you know, because they're not eating the stuff that's killing us from other causes or whatever, you know.
Not
Anyway,
going to disagree.
but Hall, you were writing poetry at the time of Chernobyl. What was?
Yeah.
Do you ever look back at that poetry, and do you think it holds up?
Oh yeah. Well, but they were more about the world atomic. I can read you one of them if you
Yeah,
have a
okay.
moment.
We've got 3 minutes left.
Uh, well, okay. Well, hold on. I'll do. God, only 3 minutes. I don't know if I'll make it. Hold on here.
We have to have you back for more just for the poetry hall.
I'll just read part of this one.
All
A
right.
suburban holocaust. His hair was flaming orange. That innocent boy on the street we used to tease. Everyone pushed him around. Rarely did he talk back, even when the baseball cracked his front teeth. His father, somber, worked in the garden the day long, mowed the grass, well respected by all. Suburban, very suburban. There was absolutely no reason for me to suspect. Beneath the shag field, squash court, where a labor strike had shifted the project from the Oregon forest to the city of Chicago itself, his father had worked, diligent, hush hush, no one would suspect. With its calatrons wrapped in dental braces with silver wires borrowed from the treasury, fears that their radioactive mass might accidentally go critical were peremptorily dismissed. With the hog butcher of the world diligently inspecting shipments of K rations for the brave troops overseas, no one would have ever realized if the blow had been more than a crack in his teeth. The very jaws of his skull split apart by a scrap of meteorite and began to burn upon his blood scalp. The whole earth staggered as if in an epileptic fit and swallowed whole the fury of its babbling tongues. The sun itself plummeted to the metallic sands and engraved his shadow into the cemetery stone. Leprous flesh resurrected from its ancient tomb and dripped like molten lava from his guilt-ridden bones. Even the rivers could not cool his flaming hair in the awesome serenity that overwhelmed him. Upon my return, I was a witness to the blaze of his hair upon the suburban lawn, smoldering without attention. It was Sunday. Certainly no one suspected the embers to spread. Certainly not he who was working on leave after working so diligent like his father, who was standing so somber before him in the service of Pluto, Mars, and Fission Incorporated. Still haunted by his serene composure, I must declare, has the breeding of a nuclear holocaust become a family affair?
Now that's a vision
Bravo. Thank you so much
to
for
take
that.
seriously.
Well, I grew up in a nuclear neighborhood, so my
Wow.
neighbors years ago were working for well, father worked for the Manhattan Project, and the son was making plutonium. So there you go.